Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy to have with us today Kristen Lojewski. Welcome to the show, Kristen.
Thanks for having me.
Kristen grew up in poverty in Indiana, became the first person in her family to attend graduate school. Congratulations. And now she runs a Milwaukee law firm dedicated to one of the hardest fights a family can face, taking on a nursing home corporation after something went horribly wrong. So your own grandfather, Kristen, experienced bad care at a nursing home, and you said that's what's ignited all this. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so um my parents got divorced when I was 3 years old. So someone who was super pivotal in my childhood was my grandpa. He was big buddy, I was little buddy. And so when he suffered his second stroke, he went into a rehab facility in Indiana. I was living in Florida at the time, so I was one of those family members who was out of state that I see often happens in a lot of cases that I handle now. And he walked, like literally walked into the facility. When he was discharged, he was wheeled out in a wheelchair. He was one of those older men who loved to snooze on the couch. So he would just, kind of like doze off while we were discovering that they would pass him by for meals because he would just kind of doze off in his room rather than, going in and seeing if he wanted to eat. He was soiled all the time. When my grandma picked him up, she got a bag of his clothes that were just covered in urine and feces. And that it was just like little things that piled up over time. And well, he did suffer his second stroke, which obviously can lead to complications too. When he was discharged from this rehab facility, he was shortly after placed on home hospice and passed away in September of 2020. And certainly one of the hardest goodbyes I've had in my life.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, I can feel that. So, you were a prosecutor in South Florida, trying jury trials before you ever touched a civil case.
Yes.
So, what did the criminal courtroom teach you that plaintiffs' lawyers really don't understand?
Yeah, well, first off, a lot of the nursing home cases that I handle, they really should be criminal, the way people are treated in some of these facilities. But I'll digress on that a little bit. I think what being a prosecutor really taught me is it gives you very quick exposure to the courtroom, how to argue motions, how to be in court, how to just present yourself in front of a judge on a daily basis. And it's very quick exposure. Whereas if you go to right out of the gate to private practice, whether it's on the defense side or the plaintiff side, the partners aren't most of the time aren't throwing you into a deposition or giving you, hundreds of cases to work on right out of the gate. Certainly there are, firms that, operate more on that um mill type uh, business model where they might just need a body. Um, but being a prosecutor really gives you so much exposure to the courtroom more than you would get um, otherwise.
Hmm. So, let me ask you some questions just posing about someone who's in a situation. So, my mom's in a nursing home and something feels off, but I can't point to a single thing. How do I know if I actually have a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the first things I would always recommend a family member to do is first ask for a copy of your loved one's care plan. That essentially lists out the safety measures that the facility should be implementing. And whether they're a fall risk, whether they have, issues with skin breakdown, dehydration, if they have dementia, like these all are things that should be on a care plan. And then you can directly see what the facility is implementing or saying that they're implementing. And then I think one of the biggest things I would also recommend is visit visit your family member, and don't visit at a consistent time. It's like a lot of times people are like, "Well, I'm free on Saturdays, so every Saturday I go and I see mom." Um Visit at different times, because if the facility is expecting you or expecting, some type of visitor, you maybe I'm a little jaded, but I would expect that they might button things up a little bit. Whereas if you're visiting at different times, you might see things that you weren't expecting to see. And then another avenue that families have is they can request, and they should be part of, the interdisciplinary team meetings. That is a meeting where kind of some of the key players that are caring for your loved one, like a nurse, sometimes there's an administrator in there, someone from physical therapy, dietary, and you should be there too, so that you can sit down with these people and talk about the plan of care in place for your loved one. Those would be the main things. And I feel like families, like, your loved one the best. So your gut is usually not wrong. And like, obviously, if you think that your loved one is like in immediate jeopardy or immediate danger, pull them out, call 911. These are all like emergency situations, of course.
So, what are the warning signs that most families miss until it's too late?
It's so hard to when I get, a call, oftentimes families are feeling so much guilt because they think that they did miss all of these warning signs. Honestly, a lot of the warning signs are pretty obvious and families do see them, but then they're reassured by the facilities. And so it's really like a breakdown of trust from the facility more than anything. Whereas I've heard countless times that families are actually seeing the warning signs, bruises on their loved one. Their loved ones may be a little more scared around certain staff members or a little more reserved. Maybe they're rapidly losing weight. These are all pretty obvious things to see. And families oftentimes do pick up on the right warning signs. But the problem that I see is then the facility says, "Oh, no, it's okay. We can care for your loved one. We have this under control. We're going to try this new thing, or we're going to implement this intervention." Um,
So I
and
get a question, right? Because I'm going to jump in there
yeah,
because I've felt
yeah,
myself. I've went through this. Both my parents have passed, and they one was in a rehab, and then the other one was in nursing home and assisted living. And um, how do you so you're describing these things, and when the nursing home or the assisted living or whatever comes back to you, says, "Oh no, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. We have this. We're going to do this and this and this." How do you gauge when you got something going on in the back of your mind that this is not right, but you're thinking, I maybe you don't have that many different alternatives. What do I do? Well, they seem like they're doing their best. How do you work through those kinds of issues?
yeah. I think part of it is advocating for your loved one as much as possible, and really like upping your visits and making sure. And I know it's can be burdensome, right? Because we all have our own lives, and we have jobs and probably families and children of our own that we are also, trying to juggle. But what I often see is when families start communicating and they get involved early, certainly it only takes one time, so something bad can still happen. But when I see and hear something bad happening when the family is really involved, it always makes me wonder about those residents there who nobody comes to visit them, who they don't have advocates, because a lot of my clients were amazing advocates for their loved one, and bad things still happen because the
Mhm.
facilities are so understaffed. And most states, all states should have a state agency that's able to come in and investigate the facilities. Whether or not that is a fruitful investigation is another story. They're strapped for resources, and sometimes in these smaller communities, everybody knows everybody too.
So if the nursing home is saying, well, those injuries are, those are just part of aging, is that ever actually true, or is that generally just a deflection?
I'm gonna give you such a lawyer answer, it depends.
It depends.
Um, so I would say it really does depend on what the injury is. Also, if you're concerned as a loved one, have them sent to the hospital and evaluated by an independent provider. A lot of these facilities have, um, like, independent contracts with nurse practitioner groups or MDs that will come in and observe your loved one. And I'm not saying that they're not, in some circumstances, they're not, actually doing their job and actually notating things. Um, but if you have your loved one, if you're really concerned and have your loved one actually sent out and evaluated to like a local hospital that has no affiliation with the facility, what I typically see in situations like that is when an independent provider gets a patient, they want to document how this patient is actually coming to them, because they also do not want to be liable if something goes wrong. So with especially with, emergency admission to a hospital, I will see things like malnourished, frail. They'll take pictures of the pressure wound if there's one. So those are really things that I would, tell the family, if you're really concerned, have them sent out, have them evaluated by an independent provider. And if the facility is saying, well, this is just aging, I hear that all the time as a defense in my cases, well, they were 90, this wound was unavoidable because they're a diabetic or they're, older. A lot of times it's like they're old, so these things happen, is pretty much
Hmm.
what the defense is saying. And the truth is, do falls happen? They do sometimes. But a facility cannot say that something like a fall or a wound is unavoidable if they are not implementing every reasonable safety measure that they can in order to keep your loved one safe. So it really comes back to looking at the care plan and, you know, uh, calling your state ombudsman, or if you need to talk to a lawyer just to see, is there something here? Is there something more that I could be doing or should be looking for?
So if my loved one has dementia, is just declining mentally, maybe even can barely communicate, does that make it a lot harder to pursue a case? And so if they do have trouble communicating, should I still report what they're telling me?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I wouldn't necessarily say it makes it harder to pursue a case. A lot of my clients had dementia at the time. Um, I absolutely think families should take what their loved one says seriously, even if their loved one does have dementia. Um, I don't want to get, too dark on what can happen in these facilities, but believe it or not, sexual assaults occur inside these facilities, and a lot of victims who are targeted are those with dementia because people, the perpetrator essentially believes nobody's going to believe them. They're not going to remember. They're not going to be able to actually communicate what happened to them. But there are other signs, like what I was talking about earlier about, maybe being more reserved or afraid toward a particular staff member, or maybe their mood has significantly changed. And so I would encourage families to believe
So
their loved
the
ones.
sexual assault thing, this is didn't really think about that. So is that happen? I mean, how is it? I wouldn't say common, but is it regularly reported at different places?
So it's hard to know. I mean, it's just like sexual assault cases that aren't in facilities. There's probably so many more that's actually happening that are not reported, but yeah, that's happening in nursing homes and memory care facilities. It's the ones I know about are obviously reported ones. I'm sure there are more that aren't reported.
So your opinion about can't because you have really never occurred to me before, but you have this clientele or patients who are impaired or could be victimized really easily. Do you think that it attracts some of those people who are you know perpetrators?
So I think it certainly does, but it's really the onus is on the facility to conduct background checks and really make sure that residents, and specifically residents with impaired cognitive states, have safe people around them.
So who's legally allowed to file a claim? Is it me, the facility, my parents? Who can file a claim?
So that varies by state. Here in Wisconsin, if it is a case against a nursing home or assisted living facility, and your loved one has passed away because of the negligence, adult children can bring a claim, spouse can bring a claim, and I've represented parents as well. Um, that that's really like the grouping of who I typically see. Unfortunately, extended family members here in Wisconsin don't have a wrongful death claim. That doesn't mean that an estate claim can't potentially be brought, but an estate claim is your loved one's pain and suffering and survival claim, essentially. And that all has to go through the probate court.
So I saw on here, Wisconsin caps wrongful death damages at 350,000 for adults. This is almost unbelievable. How do you explain that to a family who just lost their mom? Is that right? Is 350,000?
That is right. It's one of the worst conversations that I have to have with families outside of like what the facts are, and what they know happened to their loved one. And the reason is because so I'm in the Milwaukee area. You go to Chicago and the same thing happens. The legislature is essentially telling us that our loved ones' lives are worth less than if they were to be at a facility in Chicago and the same thing happened. And all these families want is accountability. And when you're dealing with a chain corporation nursing home, accountability to the tune of $350,000 is like a drop in the bucket to them. Now,
Right.
the
Yeah.
estate claim has damages caps of $750,000. So if we don't factor in punitive damages, um, the nursing home's exposure is 1.1 million if it's a wrongful death case and there's a wrongful death claimant who can actually bring a claim. And I mean, even that with some of these facilities, $1 million is nothing to them. And they're certainly not paying that without a huge fight.
So is there pain and suffering that's also, or is that just the cap? That's it.
So that the $750,000 cap for the estate claim is the pain and suffering. So the pain and suffering cap is $750,000 essentially, if you look at it like that. Which uh, I can't tell you why the legislature specifically did that, but I think, from my perspective, the elderly community is just so underserved, and it they don't have a lot of people fighting for them. And I think one of the biggest things is people think, well, they're old, they've lived a good life. Oftentimes in my cases, what happens to them, whether it's a fall or they wander outside of the facility and get hurt, um, it they don't last very long. It's a week, 2 weeks, maybe a couple months tops, if they pass away from these particular injuries because they are so elderly and they are so frail. And to say that that's, only worth $750,000 is just such an arbitrary number when it really should just be decided by a jury and by the facts of the particular case.
So walk me through what actually happens after a family calls you for the first time. What does that first conversation look like?
So the first conversation is, the biggest thing I do is I hold space for the family and, um, let them be in their feelings because it's oftentimes the first time they're sharing everything that happened to their loved one. So it brings them back to certain moments and certain feelings. Of course, if their loved ones passed away, we're talking about that person and how they're feeling about, the passing. And I get a lot of the facts. Uh take down I take down all of their medical treatment. Who Sorry, I had a call coming through for a second. So, I take down their medical treatment and the providers so that I can, if they decide to retain my services, I can collect all of those medical records. And then I just have a very honest conversation with them. I try not to information overload. So if it's already a long conversation, I'll break it up into two conversations, two phone calls. But I have an honest conversation with them about the damages caps, about that we need to collect and review the medical records first before we can definitively say that there's a legal case. And then once we get to that point, let's sit down and let's talk about what the next steps look like, whether that means we file a lawsuit right away, or maybe we try to see who the insurance company is and try to resolve the claim without the need to file a lawsuit. Oftentimes, I find these cases need to go into litigation to get full and fair value for the family.
So obviously these cases cost money to pursue. How does your fee arrangement work so families aren't paying out of pocket?
Yeah, so families don't have to pay me anything at all. My firm advances all the costs on any of these cases, and the only time my firm recovers any money is if I recover money for the family. And that fee comes out of the settlement amount. And I have like a very firm, hard line of my firm will never recover more than what the family recovers. I do not believe that to my core. Sadly, there are firms who do that, that
Hmm.
they will, their costs, you get back your costs
Right.
as a law
So,
firm, and then addition to the fee, and all of a sudden the family's getting pennies, for what
right.
they went through.
Well, bully for you. I think that's great because I know that you can get trapped as a law firm when you're with expenses going through these kinds of, because the particularly the if you're talking to the big corporation, they like to drag things out, don't they?
Absolutely. They will fight tooth and nail. And I mean, the difference in the business models alone from an insurance defense firm versus mine is the insurance defense firm gets paid every time they answer an email, every time they answer a phone call, every time they click a button to look and review a case. They can, even strategically bill for, thinking about strategy on a case.
Mhm.
So it's in their best interest to drag it out. And then additionally, I see a lot of times in cases where the person I represent is the living spouse who's also elderly. Sometimes the facilities will drag out litigation, and I think it's to see if that person's going to make it along for the ride. Which is horrible that they do that, but that is the nature of these cases. They're very litigious.
How long does a nursing home case typically take, and what are the phases the family should expect?
Yeah. So every case is going to be a little bit different of how long it actually takes. I try to collect the medical records as quickly as I can, review them as quickly as I can. I'm a little beholden to third party providers, obviously, in getting those records. But if we're talking about strictly litigation, let's say a case has to go into litigation, lawsuit is filed, you're probably looking at, anywhere between a year and a half and 2 years, I would say, before you're actually getting your day in court. Sometimes it's more if there's motion practice, like a lot of these facilities have arbitration agreements within their admission paperwork. And if I read over an arbitration agreement and I think that it is invalid or unconscionable, that's something that has to be fought on the front end.
Right. So, if you have a an arbitration, are they trying to go with binding arbitration where they're locking you into? Is that the typical tactic?
Yes. So in these arbitration agreements that I've seen so far in the admission paperwork, they are buried in 40 plus pages of admission paperwork.
Hmm.
They are limiting residents and their loved ones' rights to a trial by jury. And they're trying to uh, get the resident or the healthcare power of attorney or durable power of attorney to agree to a binding arbitration where that means you don't file a lawsuit so it's not public record. You don't get in front of a jury so there's not a jury of everyone's peers deciding and hearing these cases. And it's really a disservice to the residents too, because I mean, you've been through it when you have to make the difficult decision to put your loved one in a facility. Sometimes it's because they just had surgery in a hospital and you have no choice. And it, sometimes there's only one or two facilities that have beds. So you really don't have a lot of options and your emotions are high. And then it's like, here's 60 pages and just sign here, sign here, sign here. And that's what happens oftentimes in
So is that
facilities.
is that legal to just say, okay, we're you arbitration, that's it?
If yes and no. So yes, it's legal in the sense that if the parties agree and they sign and the agreement itself is valid and fair to both parties, technically yes. I mean, if you've ever bought or leased a car, you entered into an arbitration agreement.
So do
There's
they limit the amount you're going to cover in those arbitration agreements, or are they just like you have to do binding arbitration?
I've seen both. I've seen some of them that do not limit it. They limit it to the state, of course, so it'd be limited to the Wisconsin caps. And then I have seen where facilities limit it even further. And of course, that's uh, from my perspective, immediate grounds to file a response motion that the agreement is invalid and unconscionable.
So what if there's something egregious that happened? Do you and you've signed this thing, or I don't know why every nursing home would just say we're gonna, as our boilerplate is always going to be um to have this binding arbitration. What percentage of nursing homes do that?
It's becoming much more common practice now actually to include it in admission paperwork. So I see it a lot. Um, One of the things about the arbitration agreements is they cannot make it a requirement of the person's admission. So some of the things they have to have is that type of language and then like an opt-in and opt-out checkbox or button. What I often see though is these are like very pressure situations. The families are given a huge stack of paper. I've even have had so far of a family member just getting a tablet and just being like, okay, I just need your initials here, here, and here. And the family member just in the moment didn't ask, well, what am I signing?
Sure. Well,
And they're going through something, so they didn't think to ask that, and I think the onus and the fault is on the facility for doing something like that, taking advantage of very vulnerable situations.
and I could see that absolutely happening. Even when you go to the hospital, they give you a tablet frequent
Yep.
now. You don't really, if you're admitted for something that's going on, it's like it's all boilerplate. Just, if you can read it, you're welcome to read it if you want, but it's pages. And all you need to do is just sign down here. And everybody, not everybody, but 95% of everybody just signs. So, want to make
Yeah.
a comment about that?
You know what? I've been guilty of it too, so I'm not gonna sit here and judge family. I just welcomed my second baby in October, and I bet you I signed all sorts of paperwork when I got to the hospital, but it was a high pressure situation. I'm about to deliver a baby. I'm like, I have to deliver the baby here because this is where my doctor is. Like, I feel like oftentimes, if I take that situation and also apply it to being admitted to a nursing home, a lot of times families feel like they don't have another choice. Would I recommend reading it? Yes. Would I recommend opting out of it? Absolutely. Because all it does, in the moment, you never think that the facility is going to hurt your loved one, is going to neglect your loved one. So you kind of think, well, why do I need this? Why does it matter? Yeah, sure, I'll sign it. But the reality is there's more protection for you if you opt out because then the biggest thing from my perspective is a lawsuit gets to be filed and it gets to become public record. And when there are lawsuit after lawsuit against certain facilities, maybe people will do some research and think twice about sending their loved one there in the future. So you're really doing uh, a service to future residents and future families too.
So, plus you're getting some vengeance. And
It's all,
there's
yeah.
something to be said for that.
I mean, it's all about accountability, right? And like so many of these family members, they feel guilty. And some things, one thing that I always tell them, because they do feel so much guilt, is that you only knew what you knew with the information that was given at the time, and you trusted the facility to protect your loved one. And every time I tell a family some version of that, when I know they're experiencing so much guilt and anguish, they're like, "Yeah, that's right. I trusted them." And it's like just like this light bulb of that's what these facilities are for. They're supposed to be there where you can trust them. I
Right.
mean, their marketing is saying they're going to care for your loved one like your loved one's part of the family, that they have the state of the art facilities, but they're not living up to their end of the bargain.
So, do you? I have two questions. So, well, actually, I have a whole bunch of questions. So, arbitration. Um, if they don't make it clear that you can opt out, is there a case that you can make? Well, they signed everything, but if you can show that they don't make it clear that you can opt out, does it really matter? You signed it.
There's a whole bunch of case law around you signing a contract, not just an arbitration agreement, you signing a contract and what the implications are that of. I'd have to see the specific contract to know, like, if there's not an opt out, if the family, I believe my clients when they tell me that they were only given 10 minutes to look through everything, they had no other choice, they weren't presented the paperwork in advance. All these things play a factor into whether or not it actually matters.
So if you are going to arbitration, should you bring a lawyer with you? I mean, can you get a better result if you go into arbitration with an attorney versus not?
Yes, I would hands down say get an attorney. And arbitration is essentially going to trial just without a jury, and it's with one arbitrator or a panel of arbitrators, and there's the specific arbitration agreement that was signed plays a factor and tells you what rules apply, what forum applies, what the process is. At least a good arbitration agreement should do that. I would not navigate that alone. I wouldn't even
So it's
navigate that alone.
so you'd be kind of like jumping into a pool full of alligators if you don't have an attorney and you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. So let's see. So I'm sure that this happens. A lot of families tell themselves it's just a bad employee. It's not the facility's fault. Is what do you have you heard that?
I have heard that. I have heard that. I think that, when we're talking about an incident of physical or sexual assault, it's hard not to agree with that statement, right? That the person was a bad employee because they were the one actually physically or sexually assaulting your loved one. But the facility itself still has a duty and an obligation to keep residents safe and provide them with a safe environment. And part of that is who they hire. A big part of that is who they hire. So when I do hear that, and I have heard that before, I remind the families that, what the civil justice system is really about is accountability through money justice. And if they want accountability through money justice, it, you have to look at everybody, all bad actors. And while one employee might have also been a bad actor, it's really up to the facility to protect the residents.
So if I'm looking around and so let's say money is no object, that's not usually the case for most people, especially, you know, people are using up all their money anyway when they go into a nursing home and the whole thing, and that's about bleeding people dry. But that's a
Mhm.
personal opinion. But so let's say an expensive nursing home that's really fancy versus a community nursing home that's not so fancy. Is there a difference in the care?
Bad care happens in all sorts of facilities, and that's probably not what people wanna hear. My recommendation is when you're looking at facilities, you're looking at these, state of the art, expensive, look at the Google reviews, look at your state's, uh, here it's the Division of Quality Assurance through DHS, look at the state's investigations and statement of deficiencies to see if your facility has been cited for what they've been cited for. A lot of times these facilities what's the phrase, slapping lipstick on a pig. They change their name, they add a few new amenities, but ultimately it's the same bad care. And when a facility changes their name and is under new ownership, they go through an entire rebranding most of the time. And part of what that does is then when someone is searching for them, they only see the good, but really they're the same old name that they were before. It's just a rebranding method by new ownership. These nursing homes are really being run like giant corporations now, and have people all the way at the top that are uh, business people at the end of the day.
Hmm. So you founded Lojewski. Did I butcher that again?
Lojewski, that's okay.
Lojewski, abuse and injury law in 2025. So what does having your own firm let you do for clients that you couldn't do before?
Ah, so many things. It's letting me help more people. I have quite a few cases, nursing home and otherwise, that I would have had to get approval to take on the case, and probably would have been told no for some of them. It's allowed me to really focus on what needs to be focused on, and that's collecting and doing a thorough investigation on the front end so that we are armed and equipped by the time we get into litigation. Because once you get into litigation, I mean, former employees don't want to talk to you anymore. The state investigation records take forever to get, so you might not even get them in time before your depositions. Um and one of the biggest shifts for me is that I stay trial ready. So I'm not afraid to go to trial. There's nobody telling me I can't go to trial, that, hey, we need to meet our quota this year. So you have to settle X amount of dollars before the end of the year. Like, I get to make those decisions. And one of the core values of my firm is that the client comes first no matter what, even above maybe the firm's interests. So it yeah, could a pre-suit settlement help the firm, run a little more smoothly? Sure. But is that what's best for the client? Is that full and fair justice for the client? That's the question I ask every time.
Okay, that is a little bit different take. So if someone's watching this right now and thinks they're in Wisconsin and thinks their loved one's been harmed, what's the best way to reach out to you and just have a conversation?
Yeah, thanks for that. So you can give me a call, 414-999-3771. You can follow me on Instagram at Attorney Kristen. Those are probably the best ways to get in contact with me. My website also is either loyeskilaw.com, or an easier one to remember, protectwi.com. And you can go on there and fill out a contact form, and that goes straight to my email, and I respond to everybody directly.
And how do you get most of your new clients? Is it just word of mouth?
All sorts of things. Word of mouth, grassroots. I love supporting my local community. So I sponsor Little League. I show up at festivals. I showed up at the Alzheimer's Association State Conference here in Wisconsin last month. Refer other referrals, other firms. Thankfully, I'm really grateful for some of them to trust me to handle the nursing home cases that come in their door. So all types of different ways I'm getting cases, and always looking to help more people though.
Okay, Kristen, thanks for coming on. This is a interesting topic and important to a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So hang with me for